Yu-Gi-Oh, like I'm sure a lot of you watching this right now, has been my childhood. It is something that no matter how old I've gotten, even though I don't really play the card game anymore, I'll still go back and watch some old episodes here and there, just for the sake of nostalgia, for basically my favorite moments in that series, as well as me fully understanding what the extent of the story beats are, and fully understanding what character growth is, and storytelling. As back in the past, all I cared about was how are these duels going to play out? What kind of new card am I going to see next? But what I'm here to talk to you guys about is not really the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, but in fact the manga penned and drawn by Kazuki Takahashi, and why I believe that despite whatever flaws Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole does have, as there is no perfect series, I think that the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga is more or less a timeless classic. Now, before I get into my thoughts and opinions on why I believe this, don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments. Like this video if you enjoy my content, and subscribe if you haven't already done so, as it really does help. I want to reach a goal of 5,000 subscribers before the end of 2022. Ambitious goal for a guy that just reached 1,000, but hey, you gotta dream big, right? Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at @TheGreekWeeb for updates on future videos, as well as just a glimpse into what I usually think or say outside of these videos. And check out my Patreon and Ko-fi accounts, as if you want to support this channel more directly, go ahead and go over there. As with support through Patreon and Ko-fi, I will get these videos out a hell of a lot quicker and a lot sooner, with very good quality to them, as I do want to upload more than just my basic 2 to 3 chapter reviews a week, depending on the series that I'm talking about. But with all that said and done, let's get right into the video in this topic. Why do I believe that the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga is a classic? Well, for one thing, nostalgia, for one thing, kind of plays a huge part into it, primarily because it's Yu-Gi-Oh! And like I said, it's a part of everyone's childhood. In the last year and a half, I have come to reread, or essentially read for the first time, the Yu-Gi-Oh manga from beginning to end. And this includes the original run of Kazuki Takahashi back in, I believe, 1997, 1998, when the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga first debuted, which had a much darker tone and a bit more cynical with how a lot of these games are played, and it wasn't focused on an actual card game that would eventually be created and be the main focus of this whole franchise and brand from that point onwards. It also includes the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist manga, which is basically just the entirety of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, excluding the filler, of course. And then there's Yu-Gi-Oh! Millennium World, which is the final arc of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, capping off the entire story that Kazuki Takahashi had begun to tell once he began writing Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist. Overall, the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga has 38 volumes, including all 3 of these different points in the series, and after reading all of it, I have to say, I enjoyed a lot of these moments more than I did in the anime for the most part. Don't get me wrong, the anime does do a lot of good for the series, primarily with fleshing out the duels and the rules of the actual game, as one of the criticisms that you could always state when rereading the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga is that when it came to the actual Duel Monsters version of it, when the card game was introduced to the story, is that you did kind of see that Takahashi was just making up the rules as he went along. And that was honestly kind of fun throughout, but frustrating the fact that it didn't really feel like the game that we all knew and loved growing up, as the anime did kind of flesh out the rules and make everything a bit more similar to the physical game. However, you did kind of feel like Kazuki Takahashi really did enjoy coming up with the rules of the game as he went along, coming up with the power system of how the cards work, their effects, the rules of the actual game, how stuff resolved. Literally, he was coming up with this stuff as he went along and improving on the rules of the games as well, to the point where at the beginning of the Battle City tournament, you literally got a full-on rule book within the volumes, like certain pages of the volumes, just giving us the actual rundown of the rules of this tournament, which would basically be the basis for the actual card game. But the one thing I liked about reading Yu-Gi-Oh! From the beginning to end was just getting to get the feel of how much Kazuki Takahashi loves games. The man lives and breathes games. The original 7 to 8 volumes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't even have the card game in it, save for that one little mini arc when Kaiba was introduced, and it was named completely different. It was called, I think, Dragons and Wizards. I think that was the name of the game before it was changed to Duel Monsters for the main title. But regardless, we got a bunch of different arcs and moments featuring different games, whether it be something like poker, whether it be Russian roulette, or like doing a game where you stab next to your fingers, and the first one, the knife hits a finger, loses. And most of these would end with Yami Yugi in making this into a shadow game, and then making the loser either lose their soul, or just straight up getting burned to death, or burned alive. Yeah, the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh Manga is very morbid and dark, and I gotta say I do kind of like it for what it was. If I just don't think of the original of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime and how the card game was initially becoming the basis for the series, you can enjoy what Takahashi was going for, as with each game, he would look up the rules of actual games and implement them into the story somehow, and with each of these arcs. Hell, the last game that was in the manga before it became all about the card game was literally a D&D type turn-based role-playing game, which was a board game where the main characters were turned into the game pieces as Yami Yugi was playing the game so that he could help them survive and beat Yami Bakura. Now, the one thing that has been a constant throughout was the Millennium items. And despite how Takahashi changed from just games in general to the card game, you knew going into Yu-Gi-Oh that with the constant relevance of the Millennium items with each story arc, that was what his initial premise was. He wanted to lead into the whole ancient Egyptian storyline, the pharaoh's memories, who he was. What we got from the beginning, it showed that the pharaoh was supposed to be like a bit of a darker half, someone that was on a tipping line to being full-on evil, a dark force due to the whole shadow game aspect. But when we go into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist series, yeah, the pharaoh is a bit more harsh, but he is still a relatively compassionate character. And we can attest that to his development alongside Yugi, as Yugi is kind of the counterbalance, the good half, who influences the pharaoh and helps them grow an attachment to their friends and the world at large, and just enjoy life. No inciting shadow games or condemning people to death. And yes, while you would think that all that would just be just forgotten about in the beginning of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist series, as you go on, especially in Battle City, surprisingly, we get a lot of callbacks to the original run, with some wild and crazy shit that the Kaiba brothers did to the main gang, to some of the stuff that has happened with them in the original series, that you would think that people would have gone back to remember all this. Whether it was a ploy for Takahashi to have readers of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist manga to go back and read his original 8 volumes of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, where it was just focused on just board games or games in general, you can just tell that he really enjoyed his work. And even now, as I believe, I'm not entirely sure that this was a backdoor pilot for a spin-off series or something, or to have future arcs, but in the lull between Duelist Kingdom and Battle City, we had Duke Devlin's Dungeon Dice Monsters arc, which is completely different in the manga and a lot darker than the anime's more lighthearted, jovial, comedic tone. With this, not only does Kazuki Takahashi show the competence of him just coming up with a brand new game just straight up on the fly, but I'm pretty sure he had an idea for this as he was writing the Duelist manga. It is very commendable that how he managed to come up with a brand new game smack dab in the middle of a manga series based off of a card game that spun off from just a one-off thing in his original work. So it's very possible he just wanted to show his chops for creating another game inside the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe have that come back down the road as like a spin-off. But there's no real way to make sure. The importance of this arc is that it leads more into the connection between the Millennium items, Bakura's stake in the matter, especially the evil spirit of Yami Bakura, and alluding to more of the future of the series. But the most important thing that this thing does, that the anime just straight up kills, is the fact that this whole dungeon dice duel between Yugi and Duke, it does not include the Pharaoh at all. The whole thing in this story arc is that it has Duke wanting revenge on Yugi and his grandfather for what happened to his grandfather, and wants to be the one to use the Millennium Puzzle. Duke, over the course of their match, begins to respect Yugi as a king of games of sorts, and this game has Yugi fighting on his own, figuring out the game, the rules, and believing in his own skills at playing games, as the Pharaoh has, in the past arc specifically, has been leading the way, being the person to win the matches. Yes, there was a tag team effort with Pegasus, but in the end, it was the Pharaoh that won the game in the end. This was Takahashi's way of telling us, hey, Yugi's the main character just as much as the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh is not in this, and this is to show us that Yugi is the true king of games, or at least inklings of how Yugi is the true king of games and why the Pharaoh is so strong to begin with, as Yugi's the reason that the Pharaoh even knows about any of the games or knows the rules in and out. And this comes back to us by the end of the series, as Yugi has been shown to be the king of games by defeating the Pharaoh, the one that has been the strong one, headstrong, and leading the way through all of these enemies, going through all these fights that mainly involved the Pharaoh and was about the Pharaoh and his memories. But the whole point of the Duke Evangaline arc was to show that Yugi can fight on his own, and that the Pharaoh and him are two sides of the same coin, and Yugi is in fact the true king of games, to give us that inkling that Yugi can fight on his own and doesn't need the Pharaoh to win a high-stakes game. Now I kind of went a bit on a tangent talking about that whole Duke Evangaline arc, but the point is, Kazuki Takahashi had a plan despite the whole change of tone throughout the story. I have a feeling that Duke Evangaline arc was something that he had planned out back in the original version of the manga before shifting over to the duelist side. I like that despite the whole changing into the card games, the Egyptian gods, then going into the Pharaoh's memories, which I believe was probably Takahashi's endgame all along, just maybe not have Yugi and the gang go in there. But I feel like just by reading through the story, even though we had to change his game model and the course of what he wanted the story to be to fit the whole, card game boom that created from his own creation, he had a plan for the Pharaoh and Yugi to find the Pharaoh's memories, discover the secrets of the Millennium items, the Millennium Puzzle. Who is the evil spirit of Bakura? What does all this mean in the grand scheme of things? What happened in the ancient past to cause the Pharaoh to be trapped in the Millennium Puzzle? It all just comes back around, and despite the change in direction, originally from something that was a lot darker to a much lighter story. Now, don't get me wrong, the Yu-Gi-Oh Manga is fairly dark. For a lot of dark moments, even in Duelist and Millennium World. But the point I'm trying to get at, that I keep, I think, like tipping my toe around or repeating multiple times, is that Takahashi knew what he was doing. He had a plan, and he just altered the course of it and added the elements of the Duelist manga to shape the furtherment of the story. That's why I think this series is a classic, that no matter how many times you go back and read it, you'll enjoy it. You'll also take up inklings of what Takahashi meant for the grand scheme of the story and how things ended up going. And you just come to appreciate the story more and more, as while this is your childhood and you're more nostalgic for it, reading it in this light, in its original form, you come to understand how much Takahashi just straight up loves the series that he was working on. And while that's the one thing that while Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise as a whole you still enjoy, that's why the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a classic and why it holds too many people's hearts, whether it be the anime or the manga, as you all share one thing, and that's Takahashi's initial vision of the story. How much he enjoyed writing these characters, how much he enjoyed shaping the world and the lore of this entire series and franchise that would to come. How the Shadow Games and his love of games would create and culminate into something that just was nothing like it originally. Say for I think maybe was Kaiji around the same time as Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist or something? I need to look into that. This part is not in the script. This is just a thing that just popped into my head. But yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! The manga is a classic. Despite there being differences and extensions in the anime, the manga just has the whole touch and feel that Takahashi put his heart and soul into what he was writing and drawing, and he just had a really good idea of what he wanted the story and characters to turn out, and he just adjusted that to the new format that he had to do. But in the end, I think Takahashi himself was kind of, satisfied with what he had done. Despite the Yu-Gi-Oh! R spin-off series, which I think he wrote, he had an idea of what he wanted to do. He enjoyed what he did, and in all honesty, I wouldn't have minded if there was two different manga going on at the exact same time, one with the card game and one with just the Takahashi coming up with all kinds of different games and different game ideas, or just reshaping or redoing whatever kind of basic or complicated games that existed in the world at that point. And hell, if he wants to come back and make another manga that involves games, it just can't be Yu-Gi-Oh!, then I'm all for it. He is a talented artist and writer, and I really can't wait to see if he creates a new manga series or story in general. I just can't wait to see what the man comes up with next. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. We'll be liking and subscribing and hit the notification bell with updates on future videos. It really does help. Also, don't forget to leave comments down below on your thoughts on this type of video, and if you agree or disagree with my takes. What's your favorite Yu-Gi-Oh series? What did you think of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga upon first reading it or rereading it? And which do you prefer, the manga or the anime? I know that's going to cause a whole comment war, but I'm just curious. And with all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.